Alright folks, today I'm here once again to bring you yet another case of environmental storytelling in the Walking Dead universe. As most of you probably already know, I have an entire playlist with over 25 of these videos which you can click right here. But if this is somehow your first time watching, environmental storytelling is a filmmaking technique where a series of objects or bodies will be laid out in a way that conveys a story to the viewer without explicitly stating what that story is. In today's video, I'm going to be exploring Manhattan's Bellevue Hospital featured in Dead City Season 2, Episode 7, which is actually the first case of environmental storytelling I've covered from the New Era spin-offs. I'm going to structure this video by taking you through the scene as it was first presented before going back and attempting to piece together what we discovered into a coherent story. Though, admittedly, this is one of those locations where it isn't necessarily about the mystery of what happened here, but a deeper look into the bleak and depressing era that was the early outbreak in Manhattan. So with that, if you have suggestions for future topics, let me know in the comments down below, and if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you dropped a like and subscribed on your way out. Now, in order to paint the dark picture of what Bellevue looked like during the early outbreak, you need to understand the chaotic state of New York City at the time. You see, when the dead began to rise across the world, New York was seen as the epicenter for the outbreak in America, as the city held a population of over 8 million in 2010, with over 1.5 million residing on the island of Manhattan alone. With the dense infrastructure and population on the island, the streets became nearly impossible to navigate as the dead would have greatly outnumbered the living within only hours. So although escape was possible for a short period through one of the major bridges, reaching them was a different story entirely. We know the military spent quite a bit of time attempting to clean up Manhattan by dumping the cold bodies in the sewers, but in the end, the dead population was too overwhelming to handle. So 2 weeks after Monument Day, much like every other major city in the US, New York would be targeted with napalm and firebombed by the US military, with every major and minor bridge to and from the island being taken out in an instant, leaving those in Manhattan to decay in isolation. In the years since, it's been rumored by survivors that a nurse within Bellevue had managed to hide a bag of medical supplies within the walls of a third-floor operating room during the bombings, and depending on who you asked, it may still remain there now. Many have died trying to find it, but when an injured Ginny arrived at Negan's doorstep with little chance of survival without antibiotics, Negan knew he had to take the risk to find what she needed. Which brings us to the gates of Bellevue nearly 18 years later in the modern day. Right away, there's actually quite a bit we can take from this shot alone. With the gates remaining closed and a few walkers within the courtyard appearing to have mostly been patients and medical staff originating from the hospital, it appears as if somebody managed to secure the grounds before the surrounding dead population from the streets pooled in. We do see a couple ambulances parked at the front doors, but in no way do they look like an attempt to barricade the entrance, which is a vastly different image than what we typically see from hospitals in the Walking Dead universe. In so many cases, these medical centers have been shown to be the worst possible places you could find yourself during the early outbreak, as more often than not, they were initially hot spots for reanimation for most cities and towns across the world. As a place where you would naturally think to go for help during a catastrophic event, most hospitals would become military safe zones once cleared, as we've seen with locations like Harrison Memorial or Grady Memorial Hospital. But when we take a look at Bellevue, we see a distinct lack of military occupation or protection. The rumor of a nurse hiding meds during Operation Cobalt, assuming it's true, shows us that Bellevue was still semi-functional in some form up until the bombings. So the lack of military presence, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily mean this place fell within the first few days of the outbreak, but rather contributes to the idea of the island being too chaotic and dense for the authorities to even reach it before giving up. But as Negan makes his way through a poorly boarded up window, we immediately see the interior trashed with clear evidence of bloody deaths occurring in the main lobby, though we don't see any bodies put down on the floor or evidence of body bags as we do at Harrison Memorial, meaning those who died here turned and walked away, which further contributes to the idea the authorities never made it. Though when Negan spins around, we do see a lone walker trapped behind a glass door that appears to be dressed in tactical gear. Taking a closer look, I can't identify any sort of rank patch, insignia, unit marking, or name tape, so I'm gonna presume this was a regular survivor, not military. And judging by the extensive head trauma and what looks like possible burns on the face, I believe this individual took shelter here following a severe injury from Operation Cobalt and passed as a result. But regardless, as he continues his search for the hidden supplies, Negan makes his way through the eerie hospital halls while encountering regularly dressed walkers along the way, which could have been visitors who were unfortunate enough to be trapped here on Monument Day, or more than likely were the bodies of those who failed to find the medical supplies all the same. Though while hiding, Negan enters a closed room with a distinct trail of bloody footprints leading in, revealing the reanimated body of a young boy who appeared to have been bit and turned while hiding and waiting for help. This is a pretty grim scene, but it's immediately undercut by Negan goofily slipping and hitting his head, causing him to begin hallucinating who would later be revealed to be an apparition of his wife Lucille. So obviously, anything involving her won't be included as legitimate evidence. But as Negan's mission continues, he comes across one of the most haunting areas of the hospital, as a room full of child walkers stand entirely still in a dormant state due to an extended lack of stimulation to their senses. Now, this isn't anything new. We've seen walkers lie in dormant positions in the past, but the extreme state of disassociation they're in actually does tell us a lot. Think back to the early prison arc. When Herschel was bit, we saw a walker lie as if dead, only to shoot up immediately when its victim was in place, almost as if it still had a sense of awareness, but was conserving its energy. While later on in season 11, we see a whole group of dormant soldier walkers, though instead of behaving in a trap-like way, it appears they have been in this state for so long they truly entered a sleep-like trance. The fact that all these children are in this one room tells me somebody instructed them to stay there when things were going bad, but never came back. We've never seen a dormant walker stand before, which is an interesting quirk, so perhaps that could have something to do with their young age, but with them remaining together in a single room without wandering away once, while failing to even see Negan directly in front of them, I think these children have been alone here and haven't even been alerted to another wandering survivor for the nearly 20 years since their passings. None of their parents ever arrived, and no nurses or doctors ever came to check up on them, probably as a result of Operation Cobalt. They were alone before one of them turned and took out the rest, and I think that's possibly one of the most tragic untold stories in The Walking Dead. Though, despite the horrific scenes encountered so far, Negan would finally arrive at the nurse's office rumored to hold the hidden supplies. And although he would never find it as a result of Lucille's hallucination leading him away, Negan would get his hands on a ventilator, which was gonna have to do. It's hard to say if a hidden bag of medical supplies ever existed in the first place. But to Negan, the risk alone was worth the traumatic experience that were the dormant halls of Bellevue Hospital. But with that, we now have enough evidence to go back and piece together a coherent story using what we've discovered. But remember, I am just theorizing based on what I've noticed, so it's entirely possible I can misinterpret or miss some evidence altogether. But as always, this is where you guys come in. I'd love to hear what you believe happened here in the comments down below. When the dead rose across the planet on August 27, 2010, Manhattan was seen as one of the most chaotic urban centers during the outbreak in America, as its dense population and infrastructure made it nearly impossible to escape the island. But for the sick patients within Bellevue Hospital, Well, they were already surrounded with the medicine and equipment needed for their survival. So while the streets outside were rapidly filling up with the dead, some of the remaining nurses, doctors, visitors, and even patients who refused to flee managed to lock the gates, securing the bottom floor the best they could with wooden boards across the windows. Hospitals were often the most dangerous places to be during the outbreak, as most deaths would have initially occurred in these medical centers. But in Bellevue's case, they could almost be considered the lucky ones, as every street in Manhattan was already crawling with the dead, preventing more scared patients from arriving early on, which left them with only their own to care for. The military had tried to combat the dead and establish safe zones throughout the city within the days following, but again, with the sheer amount of walkers already milling around the island, this quickly became a fool's errand. So although Bellevue may have been a tactical location intended to have military occupation, the soldiers simply never made it, leaving those inside the hospital to ride out this calamity on their own the best they could. For the first day or so, it may have seemed like survival was possible given they kept quiet and hunkered down while continuing treatment for their patients. But when power shut off across the city as a result of the abandonment of critical infrastructure, most of the medical staff knew they were now working on borrowed time as the backup generators only held so much fuel. Many patients were relying on respirators or other modern-day equipment for their treatments, so as these generators slowly ran dry over the next week, many wings of the hospital would become uninhabitable when these untreatable patients slowly began turning. Bellevue was a very large establishment, however, so despite the dead now roaming the halls in some areas with even more on the streets preventing them from leaving, many surviving nurses would begin hiding their remaining patients in various secluded rooms. Though not everyone would be lucky enough to navigate to safety at this time, as a young boy who had been visiting his sick relative would find himself separated from his parents and aimlessly wandering in the dark before getting bit and hiding away, where he would then spend hours begging and crying for somebody to come help him. A wish that unfortunately never came true, as the boy was left to slowly pass alone. One kid may have been left behind in the bloodied halls, and although the weight of this tragedy fell heavy on those remaining in the hospital, two selfless nurses would volunteer to protect the children getting treatment in the pediatric ward to assure no other child suffered the same fate. With their parents never making it to Bellevue in the days following the outbreak, it could only be assumed they were torn apart in the streets trying to reach their kids. So if these children were to survive this calamity, these nurses were gonna have to be the ones to lead them through it. Keeping a group of children calm, quiet, and healthy during a catastrophic event was already a difficult task. Though, come the early morning hours of September 10th, 2010, this objective became nearly impossible as the US Air Force had been ordered to bomb every major city in the country with napalm in an effort to exterminate the dead as a result of their failed on-the-ground containment efforts, sending the survivors within Bellevue into a complete state of panic as the world was now crumbling outside their walls. Some surviving patients, medical staff, and visitors would attempt to escape through the courtyard, but between the blinding smoke and the walkers out on the streets, they weren't even able to unlock the gate before the dead got them through the bars. The halls inside weren't much better at this time either, as the panic had caused the few remaining survivors who didn't flee through the courtyard to scramble throughout the building in an attempt to find safety, unfortunately including one of the two nurses now succumbing to fear who had previously vowed to protect the children. Though, this only led to more deaths as the already turned were actively hunting the living. Previously safe areas of the hospital were quickly becoming overrun or unstable as a result of the bombs, so attempting to secure the children deep in the pediatric wing for safety, the last surviving nurse who refused to give up on these kids would attempt to keep them calm. But with the remaining panicking survivors throughout Bellevue attempting to loot whatever medical supplies they could carry before fleeing, the last nurse knew she was gonna have to make a move if these kids were gonna get what they needed for survival in the long run. So instructing the children to remain put and huddle together no matter what with the promise to return soon, the nurse would begin navigating the halls while collecting anything she could. But between the loud explosions and lack of lighting, avoiding the dead became nearly impossible. So believing she could secure the supplies in an operating room and come back for it later, the nurse would attempt to make her way to the 3rd floor. However, nobody would ever find out if she actually made it, as she would never be seen again after this point. Survivors at the time had claimed to see her protecting the supplies while making her way through the halls as they were attempting to flee, causing the infamous bag to become the rumored holy grail of Bellevue, which would live on for years to come. Though, to the children left hiding in fear, well, from their perspective, they were left behind by those who promised to return. They had no supplies, no medicine, no energy, no adult supervision, and no knowledge on what was really happening or what the dead really were. So although they all remained put and huddled together as instructed, given they had nowhere else to go, this would result in all their ends, as one of the sick children would turn in the night before taking out the rest. These children passed alone, thinking they were abandoned by every person who ever cared for them, and even worse, nobody would ever find them in the 18 years leading up to Negan's arrival, leaving the reanimated children to freeze in place and descend into a dormant state, as if still awaiting help that would simply never arrive. By the end of Operation Cobalt, few would make it out alive, but not a single soul remained sheltered within the halls of Bellevue, though these would be far from the final deaths this place would see. One man dressed in tactical gear attempting to fight his way out of Manhattan would find himself severely injured during the bombings and attempt to find help within the hospital. But once he fought his way inside, he'd discover he was trapped even worse before eventually passing from his injuries alone behind glass. While the rumor of the nurse's hidden medical supplies would attract many survivors within the island over the next 2 decades, claiming the lives of nearly everybody who attempted the search. So despite the flames settling and the screams falling silent, Bellevue still found ways to kill for years to come, continuing on its lethal legacy. Bellevue was a unique case of a hospital acting as a safe haven during the early outbreak, but without any support and the constant curveballs being thrown the survivors' way, it was almost inevitable most inside wouldn't survive this cataclysmic era in New York's history. Now, is this interpretation of the story perfect? No, definitely not, but I think each element of evidence included at least builds upon itself in a logical way. I usually like to form my stories around protagonists, but once in a while, the setting of the story is the protagonist itself. Bellevue, in this case, acts as a graveyard for many for different reasons. Some passed away trying to escape, some passed while hiding, and some passed waiting for help to arrive. But in the end, to your average wandering survivor, their individual stories simply blended together as a horrific reminder of what the early outbreak was like. But what do you guys think? Do you believe my interpretation of the story is accurate? Did I miss something that could change this version of the story? Or do you think I'm completely wrong and something else happened here entirely? I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments down below. But that is gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching.